right. So, Eduardo, you are up first. You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. I appreciate the extra minutes. So,
Yeah. So Eduardo, you are a senior engineer at HeroDevs.
mhm.
You also live in Monterrey, Mexico.
Yeah, exactly.
You are a husband and a father of three daughters. I only have one, so I have no idea how you do it.
It's chaos. You embrace chaos, and yeah, just like that.
Right. You love Angular, Ionic, everything web related. You're also a co-organizer of the Spanish chapter of the Angular Community Meetup. You're also an organizer of the Ionic Monterey meetup, and you're an Ionic developer expert and on the road to be a GDE.
Yeah, exactly.
You got a lot going on.
Yeah, let's hope so.
uh, yeah, so tell me, you recently gave a talk over in Salt Lake City at the Utah JS conference.
Yeah.
Tell us about your experience and what was it like being the only one giving an Angular specific talk?
Well, I think it's amazing, but I think that this perception of Angular needs to change in the community because of all the. I think there were around 10 talks through the day. There were three tracks, and I was on track 13 or track 3. It doesn't matter. But if 10 talks were, if there were 10 talks, eight were from or for React, one for Angular, and one for Vue. So I think that what the community perceives of Angular needs to change. We need to promote more the use of Angular. It was like not exactly disappointed because the people that were there was excited about the Angular talk, but it was a little bit sad from the perspective of someone who loves Angular, that even though that it's amazing and the Angular team has been working amazingly with all these changes, updates, and being in touch with the community for feedback, the developers outside doesn't seem to use that much Angular. So it's a bit sad, but hopefully these initiatives help the community to approach Angular more.
Yeah, yeah, no, I've had similar experiences where I've been at just like general tech conferences and somebody says like, "Oh, what do you work in?" And I say Angular, and they're like, "Oh, do you like it?" Like,
Are you
so
being
yeah,
forced?
yeah, exactly right. So yeah, I completely agree. Um, all right, so tonight you're giving a lightning talk on signals.
Yep, exactly.
All right, well, I'll give you the floor.
Okay, perfect. Let me share my screen and just give me 1 second. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about Angular signals. I'm going to be a little bit fast here on the slides because I want to do a quick demo if times permits. I'm going to implement a service using signals that showcases an Ionic application for users. So, well, the presentation, Chris already introduced myself. So here are my social network links for Twitter or X, LinkedIn, and GitHub. They use the same handle. So what are signals? They are a reactive primitive for Angular. This is the new reactive primitive that is being implemented in Angular 16. They are based on a pattern called observer design pattern, where there's one publisher and many subscribers. And their main goal is to improve the change detection mechanism. And maybe we are moving to zoneless applications. Why are they useful? They can keep track of which signals are read in the view. They are synchronous read. They can be read synchronously, and they are always available. The value is always available. There are no side effects when reading a value. So you just get the value and that's it. And you don't have to handle explicit subscriptions like using the async pipe or dot subscribe to get the value like with observables. I usually like to do these mental models of these technical concepts. So to help you imagine what's a signal, think of a mailbox with the red flag. So the signal will be the mailbox will be the signal, and the value is whatever is inside that mailbox. So it can be letters, it can be a package, everything that fits inside there. And the family they're looking at the window will be the subscribers looking at the value of that signal. when the red flag rises, any subscriber knows that a new value or something new is inside there. So you go there, you check that, and you know exactly what's there. If someone else comes home and they ask, hey, what's in the mailbox? And you still see the red flag down, you know exactly what's inside. So you don't need to check again the value, and you just tell them. So it's a way that you can handle this, having these values available for many subscribers, which will be your views or in your templates where you get the value directly and you use that. So how do we use signals? We create the signal with the signal method, which is from, I think it exists in Angular core. And that will generate a writable signal, which is a signal that you can update the value. And you have 3 methods that can be used to update the value. The first one is set, which allows you to set or replace anything inside the signal with just the value that you are sending. Mutate, which allows you to update the contents of the signal, but it's useful for when you are manipulating objects or arrays. So you can just, for example, in that case, you can mutate the value so you can push another element into the array. And you also have the update, which allows you to replace the reference of the value inside the signal to something new. For example, in this case, I'm filtering the array, and the filter method return a new array, which is going to replace the existing value of the signal. With mutate and update, you get the reference or the value of the current signal value, so you can get modify based on that. You also get the method as read-only, which will be kind of like right now when we work with behavior subjects and we use as observable. So with as read-only, the signal can be updated. We also have 2 methods that allows us to work or get the benefit of the updates of the signal can trigger different functionality. For example, in the computed method, we can generate a new signal based in the changes of different signals. So in this case, we have this computer, which creates an array of all the attendees, which have the isSpeaker flag. So in that case, anytime that the attendees array is updated, the speakers array is updated too. And we also have the effect method, which allows us to trigger side effects that we can use, for example, to log information or to save something to local storage, do a console log. But it's really important to remember that you must avoid writing to the signal again in the effect. And one caveat of the effect is that for it to run on the next cycle, it needs to read, or let me rephrase that. The effect is going to trigger for any signal that it's read in the current cycle. So if, for example, if you update attendees there, it's going to run again anytime the attendees is updated. But if I wasn't updating or reading the value of attendees, then it's not going to trigger. It might sound complicated at first, but once you get the hold of that, it's simple, or it's better. So one of the questions that we usually have is now that the signals has been introduced to Angular, is that are we finally getting away or getting rid of RxJS? Actually, well, signals are meant to be used for synchronous events like clicks or something like you already know the value of that, or something, for example, in inputs or handling the state of your application. But RxJS is much better to handle asynchronous events like HTTP request or, well, asynchronous events in general. And luckily, we have these functions that we can use to interoperate between those. We got 2 functions from the Angular team, to signal and to observable, and computed from, which is from the community, thanks to Enea. How I always forgot how to pronounce his name, Enea Joulari and Chautard. So it's a helper function that allows you to combine any signal and observable, and you get just one signal that you can just all the values from those inputs that you send. So it's time for the demo. Let me share the screen. Just give me 1 second, because I think that we can make it on time. I got enough time, so just 1 second. So here, no, let me better share the whole screen. Okay, so in this case, we have this application which allows us to have users in the page. This is using Ionic, and we got the service and the component here. So I already have this almost set up. So when you click here, you can add a new user, but right now it's not working because it doesn't have the user service. So here, what we will do is have like a users, which is going to be a new writable signal of user, and it's going to be an empty array. And we have the read-only users, which is going to be the one that it's going to be available for the application, and it's going to be these users as read-only. And we got the methods. So here we can, I think that I have this add user, update user, and remove user. So here for the add user, we are sending just the value of the user. So it gets that. And we are doing this dot users dot mutate, and we send the current, the array. We push the user. That's it. And for the update user, I have these users, and I can mutate again in the array. And here, I think that I'm sending the user again. So I'm receiving the user, and I say this, no, sorry, splice, and I get the index. I think that it will be better if we send the index, but I'm just going to just define index, the user. And I'm going to just remove one and update that. And for the remove user, I'm going to just say users update, and I'm going to send the array, and I'm going to say array filter, and filter every user that its email is different than the email that I'm sending. So with that, we have the service, and we just need to implement that here. So let me uncomment this. And just well, I'm not going to, it's not going to have the, okay, so that's it. And then here you can send the name. Oh, I forgot to include to update the template here, which I already have of users. Oh, I think here it is. Oh man. There you go. And if I click here, it gets updated. And if I add another one, and I remove it, you can see that it updates in the web page, in the application, by using a signal. So we can also, I also had like the implementation of getting the favorite users to have a computer. and the total users to have a computer of all the users and show it here. But I'm running out of time, so I will share the links to the presentation and also the GitHub and a Netlify link so you can try it yourself. So
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eduardo.
no problem. It was
All right, we've got
fast.
Yeah, it's hard to get content in just a few minutes. Yeah, so we have some questions. I'm going to just ask you a couple just for time. Anthony asks, have there been some kind of community best practices that have been reached on how signals and NGRX, Global Store, Component Store, Signal Store should be used together?
I think that from the Angular community, well, from the Angular team, there has been some recommendation about using RxJS, interoperability, and signals. There's also some approach by the community, so you can get that from them. But I believe that when they promote them from outside from developer preview, they will have this documentation about when to use signals, when to use RxJS, and the best practices for them.
Thank you. Another question was from Chris Snow. What does testing signals look like? Is it relatively easy compared to testing observables?
Yeah, because they are synchronous. You can just test them, and you get the value. You read the value, you update the value, and then you can expect the value and check the value that it's updated or not, instead of subscribing and like with RxJS. So it's simpler.
Gotcha. Thanks. There's a couple more questions in there, so if you want to answer in the Q&A
Sure.
section.
Mhm.
And we will move on to Giovanni.
Ooh.
All right, Giovanni, so you are a software engineer and you are also a co-organizer of the Spanish chapter of the Angular Community Meetup. You're all about developing and automating solutions to make day-to-day tasks more easy. You're also a marathon runner and you like to travel and love the beach. So, what's the best beach that you've ever traveled to?
Wow, that's difficult to say. I'm originally from Venezuela, so I'll say any beach that you can find in the Caribbean is the best beach that you can find nearby. Yeah.
That's awesome. Do you do marathons when you travel?
Oh no, I used to do that when I was younger, not anymore. Yeah, but it was fun. It was a hard and fun process, for sure.
Yeah, I bet. I absolutely hate running. So running 1 mile is hard. So I can't imagine doing a full marathon.
Yeah.
All right. So tonight you're going to be talking about feature flags. Looking forward
Right.
to it. You can have the floor.
All right. I just want to ask for. I just want to apologize at first because some of my props in the PowerPoint are in Spanish. I couldn't make the change to English, but you will get the sense of the talk.
No worries.
All right. So let me share my screen. All right. All right. So have you been in these situations like when you get a ticket and you get a ticket from your business analyst and say, hey, we need this functionality, like this, for example, we need to create a new button on the main screen to empty the inventory, and therefore we can create a new inventory when we change the inventory collection. And this is all what you get from your business analyst, and then you go inspire and go programming your button and make everything look pretty, and you got your button, and you went to testing and you published it to prod, and it was all good. But the same day of the next day, all of a sudden you get a message from your BA saying, hey, this button shouldn't be in production just yet, or just for some users. And then you go crazy back to the code, remove the button, and try to apply some conditional maybe. But then your pipeline gets stuck and there is no agent to build. It's like it's going crazy. And then, well, everything's fine. Someone deleted the inventory and it was in production and you couldn't do anything because your CI/CD pipeline didn't help at the moment. So that's why we have this talk, Agile Software Development with Angular and Feature Flags. So again, to introduce myself, my name is Giovanni Rivas. I'm a principal software developer at WorkingEd. As Chris says, I'm a marathon runner, and I'm also a mountain bike enthusiast. And I'm a co-organizer of the Angular Community Meetup in Spanish, and also co-organizer of the Angular Costa Rica Meetup that we do live once a month. So what is a feature flag? A feature flag can be a decision point in your code. And why we can say it's a decision point? Because a feature flag can change the behavior of your application. And in Angular, this can be translated like showing or hiding a section of HTML, or executing or not a certain logic in your components, services, or route guard. In the early days of the software development, these flags, these so-called feature flags, were a command line, an uncommented variable in a configuration file, or even a hidden value in the computer registry. And the only way that you could activate these flags back then was by collecting the code, making the changes, redeploying, or even restarting the server or your application. But this nowadays has changed. So what can I use a feature flag for, you may be thinking? For A/B testing. Since with a flag, you can deploy multiple variations of a feature flag to different user groups. And in the UI, in an Angular application, this can be translated like testing position of the buttons that we have in a certain page, or a different, totally new screen design that is being implemented and show to different users to see how they react if they like one more of the other. And even the definition of the words or paragraph within your application. That's how you can use A/B testing. Also, the feature flag can help you to your Tron-based branch strategy. And why do I say this? Because this will eliminate like having different branches with different functionality and not being merged into master. And when you want to come back and work into that branch, you have to bring main or master into your branch, and that could be a mess when trying to merge. So if you have a feature flag in your code, you can just work in your feature or bug branch and just merge it into main. And as far as that flag is not on, then you can continue your development. This also can help you testing in production, which is not desirable, but it can help you like performing some reading testing, like reading data, no actually posting or writing data into production. And also it can help for infrastructure migration. Like for example, if you're switching databases, like if you use this feature flag, then and if the new database failed for any reason, you can switch easily to your old database and then continue using your application. So where can I configure feature flags? As I said before, well, this used to be sometimes in a JavaScript file or a configuration file that we may have in your application. But nowadays we have a lot of SaaS services like Harness, Growthbook, and Molasses. But the one that I have worked with the most is LaunchDarkly. What can you do with LaunchDarkly? You can just serve true or false variations, but not only that, you can serve string, numbers, and JSON variations, not only true or false. You can also target specific users for the value of your flag. It's like if you have one flag on, then you can configure LaunchDarkly to serve different values to different type of users, even though the flag is on. Also, you can schedule your flags to be on or off. It's like, for example, you're having, I don't know, maintenance at 12 in the midnight and you don't want to wake up in the middle of the night to turn the flag, then you can schedule that time and the flag will automatically be turned on or off depending on your scenarios. And feature flags in LaunchDarkly can not only be used in the UI for Angular applications, but also for backend services. And my time is pretty much up. I will leave you here with a demo repository that I have built. It has a boilerplate of how you can set up your application for using LaunchDarkly. You can, by using LaunchDarkly, you can just log in with your Google account. They will give you a 14-day trial with all the pro functionalities. And after that, they will give you just basic access, but you can play around pretty much with all that. And also you can find all my links in this other code down here. And that's it for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks,
Let's
Lou.
see here. Looks like we have one question from Anthony. Is implementation of feature flags in code essentially just checking Boolean values all throughout your code in a central feature flag file?
Yeah, depending what service, what approach are you using? Like, as I explained it a little bit earlier, LaunchDarkly doesn't only is useful for true or false flags. It can serve JSON variations, string variations, number variation, depending on the scenario that you may have.
Okay. And Oscar asked, he said, hello from Costa Rica. See you on Thursday's talk. How do you feel about Firebase's remote config capabilities for this kind of flags and audience segmentation?
I really haven't used Firebase for this kind of approach, but I can get to you. I can get back to you on this and give you my opinion for sure.
Awesome. All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Great talk. All right. Next up, we have, tell me if I'm pronouncing your name right. Is it Alain?
Yeah, that works. Alain works for me.
All right. Well, great to have you here. So you are an expert trainer. You work at angulartraining.com. You're a coach for not only Angular, but also React. You're GDE, international speaker, photographer, and world explorer. So we have a lot of travelers on here tonight. So as a passionate photographer and traveler, where would you most like to go for a photo shoot?
Yeah, so there's one thing that I haven't done yet, and that's on my bucket list, and that's, taking a picture of an aurora borealis. So I would have to go up north, maybe north of Canada or Norway or Sweden, and, wait for the night and capture that. That's one of the things that, yeah, I would really like to do.
Yeah, that would be so cool. I have heard that this year it's been very actively. There's a lot of solar activity. So I wish I could also travel someplace and see that. That would be such a sight to see.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so you're going to be talking tonight on state management and getting started with that, which I think state management is something that it sounds very daunting, and there's a lot of different ways to do it. So looking forward to seeing your take on that.
Exactly. So yeah, I'm going to talk about what I like to call progressive state management with Angular, because the thing is, if you attend conferences or read blog posts on Medium and everything, you're going to hear about lots of keywords. You're going to see lots of different options. And if you're a beginner, it's super confusing, right? Because, oh, should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? Am I doing things wrong? It's a lot. It's scary. And so my goal with this talk is to simplify things. That's what I do as a trainer. So yeah, as you mentioned, I'm a GDE for Angular, Web, and Google Maps. I've been working with Angular and before that AngularJS for a very long time, because I actually started in 2011 and AngularJS was not even available back then. It was just a beta version. So I've been working with, all versions of AngularJS and then Angular over the years, and yeah, really became specialized as someone who does training and consulting over the past 7 to 8 years, and starting this Angular training company, which is what I do these days. Most of the time is spent training, writing, blogging, videos, meetups, conferences, you name it, all of these things. So I'm going to ask a quiz question to see if people are following in the chat. So anyone using NGRX or NGXS or Akita or a state management library? Okay. Oh, I see quite a few votes, which is pretty good. Lots of NGRX. Okay, perfect. So now who is considering using state management, but not using it yet? Meaning you're thinking about it, but you're like, I don't know. Kind of on the edge of getting into it because, it seems a little bit scary. Yeah, component store is pretty good, scary to adopt. Okay, perfect. And who thinks that state management is too complex, scary, and verbose in the first place? Well, that's probably lots of people. Everyone we didn't talk so far. Okay, so what's the idea around progressive state management? So with this talk, I'm going to start with the basics. So how you deal with data in Angular when you're just, and then I'm going to evolve that code a little, that you don't have to do everything at once. You can really get started with the basics. And when you're comfortable with that, you can slowly increase and start adding more options. And then you get comfortable with that and you keep, progressively getting closer and closer to using a state management solution. And that's what we're going to see over the next few minutes. So option number 1, services and data bindings. When we learn Angular, as soon as you start learning Angular, you probably see that kind of thing where you would create a service, and the service has your data, and then you have some sort of getter and setter to interact with that data through the service, right? That's really option, the basics of the basics. You have your components, they get that service, and they interact with the data using that service. This works perfectly well. Then you inject a service in a component, and component does its thing, displays the data. So I have the example I want to show you tonight is using this application here. So it's a license plate store. And in that store, we have license plates, and these license plates have prices. And when I click on this currency switcher component, I can select a different currency. So I click on the currency, and you see that all of my prices change. So as I click, the prices change, the currency changes, and everything changes. So it's basically 2 components that communicate. One is changing the currency, and then we have multiple instances of that other component, the license plate component, that basically subscribes to that info and displays it. So in this current implementation, easy enough. I just have a service, currency service, where we set a new currency. So when I click on that dropdown and select a new value, I'm calling this setter. And then we have our other component just calling the get currency method to get updates. And we see that it's working, right? As I click around and change the values, the prices get updated. But the thing is, when you do this, there's a slight problem that's happening. See that getter? I added a console log in the getter on purpose here, because I'm going to clear my console, move this around, and you'll see that as soon as I click somewhere, my getter is being called many, many times. I haven't changed anything yet. I didn't even change the currency. And that getter was called 18 times. If I change the currency, then it's been called another 18 times. So what's happening from a performance perspective is that this getter is being called way too often. It's not optimized at all. And Angular has to always reevaluate call that method to get the latest value, which of course is not something we want. In a small app like this, it works, no problem. We won't break anything by doing this. But if you have thousands of components and services in your app, if you call these getters like this, you're going to be in trouble very soon. So one thing that you probably learned then after working with Angular for a little while is that there's this thing called RxJS, right? And with RxJS, we have observables. And so you've probably seen code that looks like this, where in your service, instead of storing the value as a primitive value, like a string or a number or an object, we would use something like a behavior subject from RxJS. And the idea behind this is that when we use a behavior subject, we have a specific kind of observable that stores the current value and that can send that value to any new subscriber. So it's kind of a cache of our latest data in that subject, and we expose that subject as an observable. That's what I'm doing down here. So when we call the setter, instead of setting the value directly, we just emit the value in that subject using the next function that we see here. And the getter, instead of returning the current value, returns that observable of the current value. And so as a result, our component now, what they do is they inject the currency service, they get that observable from the service, and then we subscribe to that observable using the async pipe. So this is better from a change detection mechanism, a performance perspective, because now the components are more reactive in the sense that they know that they only have to reevaluate that data when it changes. So when there's an emission, then these components get that currency and render it. So it's better than the getter that's constantly being invoked by the framework to check, hey, has the value changed? Has the value changed? So here we're kind of pushing the update to the components, not polling the service to get the latest data from it. So that's a small improvement. And when you think about it, when you do this, we kind of have it's state management, right? It's basic state management at this point. We have an object that knows how to store data, how to send it to subscribers, and how to update its own state and then propagate that info. So this is really the basics of getting into a state management solution, really. And by the way, I see in the chat that a lot of people are saying, hey, yeah, we do that a lot. This is our main way of doing things. And that's pretty much perfect, I would say. If you do that, you're on the right path, and that's a very good approach. The point I want to make is that if you do that and start having a lot of services that contain behavior subjects, then over time you realize that these services, they kind of look the same. They kind of do the same thing, and they have a very similar structure. And that's something I'm going to get into very soon. But before I get into that, I have to mention signals, right? Because that's really the latest addition to the framework. And I believe signals can be a really great solution to, implement some sort of state management. In this example here, I just took the previous example, and instead of using a behavior subject, I use a signal. That's it. I just replaced behavior subject with signal, pretty much. right? If you take the code from before, after, the differences are very minimal. So yeah, I have a signal of currency info. That's my default value. The setter is just calling the set method of the signal, setting the new value. And then I expose my signal as a read-only version. So just like behavior subjects, there's a way to expose a signal as read-only. So that's what I'm doing down here. And it's really the same service as before. I only changed, these three things. Instead of being a behavior subject, now it's a signal. And then we have pretty much the same behavior in our component. We change the type of that object. It's not an observable anymore. It's a signal of currency info. And then in our template, so no more async pipe. Instead, we call the getter of the signal, so currency info, to get the latest value, and then read the property that we want to get out of it. So that's the signal approach. If you haven't tried signals yet, I would say try to get on Angular 16 and give it a try, because I really believe it's going to be a game changer for all of our Angular apps, right? It's just the learning curve compared to RxJS is so easy, meaning you don't have to know about, the pipe method and operators and different types of subjects and all of that. You can really get started very quickly and get a very nice return over your investment in just a few minutes. So just some promotion for signals. We already talked about them, so I don't want to spend too much time on them, but just something to keep in mind for the future, that this might become the main way to manage our state in Angular applications. So yeah, this is another example where I have all sorts of things based on my signal implementation. Maybe too much for one screen here. But this is doing all sorts of things for my signal. So like computing different values out of it, turning an observable into a signal. So the exchange rates are an HTTP request that we make to a server. So this is an observable of rates, and I just turn that into a signal, and then I have a rate signal, and I can decide that I want to emit a new signal value when we change the currency or when we get new exchange rates from the server. And this is what happens at this very last line of code down here with computed. So computed allows you to combine multiple different values from different signals into a new one, which, if you were using RxJS, would mean maybe using like switch map or combine latest or fork join or any combination of operators to make that happen, maybe several of them. Whereas in here, I do it in one line of code. It's a long line, but you get the idea. It's a lot easier from a syntax standpoint to get to that same result. Okay, that was my promotion of signals. So now back to observables, back to RxJS. And as I mentioned before talking about signals, if you start having all of these services where you have a subject that holds your data and some sort of setter getter to get an observable, or and a setter to send that data to all of the other subscribers, you realize very quickly that all of your services look the same. They get to become very, very similar. And so maybe if our services become similar, we could start having something like this, where we're going to say, well, I'm going to create one service. I'm going to call it a store. And that store is of a generic type T, because it can apply to any data in my application. And so now my behavior subject in that scenario is a behavior subject of type T, which could be anything. In the constructor, we have to pass an initial state of type T, so we can create the behavior subject with that default data. And then our get state, set state are just, the same stuff as before, but now using a generic type for that behavior subject. So usually that approach is something we call an observable store service it's a generic service that you can reuse over and over again. And that way you kind of always follow the same pattern. You have one approach to deal with your data, and all of your services use that same approach. Now, of course, I call this a store because that's what state management libraries do. The place where the state lives is what they call a store. So I did that on purpose, just to show you that if you start using subjects in your services and then you start refactoring things, you're really getting closer and closer from having your own built-in state management library, right? Because you start really refactoring the code and all of the common things belong in one place. And yeah, you're kind of really thinking in terms of state management already. So once you're there, making the jump from this to using a state management library should be easy, or at least easier, because you already have the structure, the pattern of, everybody's doing the same, all of my components and services work the same way and follow the same approach, which is what state management is all about. It's really about defining where our data lives, how we update it, and have clearly identified ways to change that data. So now my currency service, I make it extend that store of currency info. And the only thing I did in that currency service is that I provide a default value using the constructor, and I create my own setter to make it more specific than set state. I call it set currency, and then I pass that data to set the state for that currency. So the service becomes super tiny. We only have the tiny bit of specificity for that data that lives in the service. Everything else is handled by the generic store class. So of course, this approach still works. I have it here. So this is my generic store service. I can go to my component. I can change the currency and everything changes automatically. Still works the same way, still using a behavior subject under the hood. But now I have a nice generic approach, which is not a lot of code, right? This fits under 20 lines of code. Always good to have, little bit of code that's pretty explicit, easy to read, easy to maintain. And then if I go to let's say the currency switcher component, for instance, you can see that it's getting its data using that service.getState method, which returns an observable. And we do some piping and mapping here to just extract the currency out of it. Because currency info is a combination of currency and exchange rate. And this component only wants the currency. So we do that little bit of tweaking here to get the observable that we want. And then we use an async pipe to subscribe and display the data. So this plays very nicely with RxJS, Angular, and doesn't require any dependency, right? You just create your own store class and start using it. So if you got that far, if you really evolved your application and start having a generic way to handle your data and have that store service that's your central place where data happens, you're really close from using a state management library, right? You're really like right there. You're basically that's really the last frontier. you're really close. when you use a state management library, the idea with state management and what's usually a little bit scary is that there's a lot of vocabulary around it. There's a lot of, concepts to get familiar with. And that's what gets a little bit scary. If you get into the principles of Redux and everything, it's like, oh my God, that's so many rules and so many, there's so much structure, that it seems almost too much. So I'm going to try to simplify it a lot and try to explain this in the easiest way I can think of. So in this example, we look at a coffee shop. In that coffee shop, a customer comes in, they want to order coffee. So they're going to come to the counter and they're going to order coffee. In state management speak, this is an action. So the action is, I want some coffee. I'm ordering some coffee. This is going to change the state of our store, which is going to now wait for payment. So then the customer says, okay, I'm going to pay for my order. It's another action, paying for the order. Then the state changes to order created. And when that order gets created, it's going to trigger what we call a side effect, meaning the guy here to the left is going to start making that coffee. So side effect is the barista starts working on the order, which is going to take some time, right? It's asynchronous, meaning once you've made your order, you just move away and you wait for your coffee to be ready, and then the next customer can go ahead. So we're not blocking anything. We just sent our action, we sent our request, and now we're waiting for our coffee patiently. When the barista is done, they're going to send another action. They're going to say, oh, okay, the order is ready. And then the customer comes, picks it up, and the order is delivered. So that's all of the concepts of state management in 2 minutes. So when you want to change something in a state management system, you dispatch an action. In our previous approach, we would be calling a setter, right? Now we just dispatch an action and it does the same result. It's going to make the state management system change something and create a new state. We talked about side effects. So this is for asynchronous tasks that run in parallel. When we don't want to block things, we have that thing that has to happen in the background, make an HTTP request, talk to an API, do any sort of thing before you get your data. Same idea, that's an effect. So effects, action, state. So let's take a look at an example now. So to illustrate that state management example, I'm using ngxs. I'm not using ngrx. And that's because with ngxs, I believe there is less boilerplate. Yeah, they wanted me to say it, so I had to. I believe it's less verbose. You have to write less code when you use a library like ngxs. In a sense that this is my state. So it's a class that has a state decorator where I say, this is a state of my currency info, and I give the type of that state. I give it a name is currency info. I give it a default value, currency USD exchange rate 1. And that's my state. Default value, the type, everything is here. And then we define so the equivalent of my setter, right, in the previous observable store approach, is now a change currency method, which in Redux speak is called a reducer. But with ngxs, I don't even call that a reducer. It's just a method that has a decorator at action. And that decorator says, this is what's going to happen when the change currency action is dispatched. So when a component says, I want to change the currency, the component is going to dispatch an action. which looks like, oh, I don't have it here, so I'll show you in the code a little bit later. But the idea is the component says, I want to change the currency. It's going to dispatch an action that says change currency and pass a new value as a parameter. So let's see that example here. This is my currency switcher component. There you go. When I change the currency, it's doing a store.dispatch new change currency. So all of the work that we do with the state management library happens through one service, which is called a store, which is also why I called it a store in my earlier example, to show you that you're really close to doing the same thing. So yeah, I'm injecting the store in here, and then I say store.dispatch new change currency of my currency. And that's it. My component doesn't know what's going to happen with this. It just knows I have to dispatch an action to change the state, and done. And this is going to end up calling the method that we saw here, because it is the one that has the action decorator change currency. And then the change of state happens in here. So we change the state, we set a new currency, we set a new exchange rates, and changing that state is then automatically going to notify any component or service that is interested in that data. And how does a component show interest in that data? How do they subscribe to it? Well, there's a simple decorator for that called select. So that's what we call a selector in state management speak. And that @select currency state makes it so that this automatically creates a query, in a sense, a query into our state to select the currency info. And this gives us an observable of currency info. If you want a more complex query, or dig into a specific part of that state, you can actually use, there's different options. I think I highlighted a couple here. So you can also call it by name. You can also have a function. So here I did a store.select, and I pass my selector function to decide which part of the state I want to select. So, and that allows you to dig deeper. So if you wanted to do something like this, for instance, currency info.currency, you could do that. So you can get a sub part of that state, a branch within a branch of your state possibly, and that would work. So in a sense, this automatically creates observables for you, so your code can subscribe to it. And of course, since we have an observable, once we have that selection, the way we get our data is the same as before, async pipe to subscribe and receive the data. So that's state management. And you can see that here in my ng-access example, I probably have just as much code as before when I did the approach with just subjects. I don't think I have more lines of code. It's equivalent. So I use ng-access also to make things lighter. And I think the excess comes from extra small, so that they try to remove as much boilerplate as possible and really focus on the bare essentials. Yeah, that's the idea. So I believe I may be out of time soon, but I'm getting to my last slide, so that's all good. Conclusion, we have many options available. And I would say there's no right or wrong. Again, the idea is do what you're comfortable with, do that works for you right now. And then over time, if your project starts growing, if your team gets more experience with RxJS and gets comfortable with using subjects and operators and such, then you can rescale a little bit and start using behavior subjects, and then maybe refactor and use a store. And then if everybody is super familiar with it and like, okay, I think it makes sense to use state management now, you can move on to using a state management library. And the thing is, again, I kind of started with the introduction with this by saying that if you go to meetups, if you go to conferences, if you go to YouTube, everybody's talking about state management. Everybody's talking about NGRX. But as Brendan Roberts said at ng-conf this year, there's only 16% of Angular apps that use NGRX, which basically means that 85%, 84% don't use it. So if you're not using state management, you're not alone. You're actually part of the majority. And that's something important to remember, right? It's not because experts talk about the nice toys, the nice technology, that everybody has to use it. You can build a full Angular app and not have state management. So yeah, that's the idea. Trade-offs. There's no silver bullet. There's no one size fits all. It's really based on, you know, your background, the background of your dev team, the familiarity they have with all of these technologies, what's going to be the easiest for everyone to work on and collaborate on. That's really the way to go. So this is a link to my slides, email address, my blog, all of the different resources. And if we have any questions in the Q&A, we can definitely take a look.
Yeah, we have a good one here from Anthony. He asked, in the last example of state management, at what point would you cut in signals? Would that be in the component class or a data access service the component outsources logic to, or even earlier in the data pipeline?
I would say as early as possible seems to make sense. Meaning my approach at this point, and again, remember that signals are it's still very early, right? We are still getting familiar with them and learning about that approach. But the way I tend to do things now is that I'm going to use RxJS only when I have to, which means with Angular, you still have an HTTP client that returns an observable, right? But that observable, as soon as I have the data, I turn the data into a signal, right? And then I work with signals all the way from here. So yeah, I try to use signals as much as possible, so as close to the source as I can. That's really the idea. You don't have to. If you have a complex application where operators are really useful for you because maybe you have complex filtering going on and you're using lots of operators and you love RxJS for that, of course, keep using it, because if it's doing the job for you, then there's no reason to change it. But yeah, that's really the idea. I would say try to use signals as soon as you can and try practicing with them. And yeah, my approach is always to be pragmatic, right? I don't play with the shiny toys just because they're shiny. I just want to stay pragmatic. If it makes sense to do it, then we can go ahead. If it doesn't make sense, if it's too much work and what we have already works well, then let's just, stick with that.
Yeah, and speaking of signals, Alex asked, and I believe this question came in when you did the the behavior subject in a service example, and then you switched it to signals. Did you observe any change in app size when changing from observables to signals?
Oh, that's a good question. So I didn't do the math, really. I didn't look at it. I don't think it would be very significant unless you're migrating from, RxJS and using a lot of different operators to using signals everywhere, and you get rid of several operators. If you do that, we could imagine that tree shaking is going to get rid of those operators and your app would get smaller, possibly, right? That's a theory. That's the way I would see it. But other than that, yeah, I would not expect too much of a difference in terms of app size.
Awesome, thank you. There's another question in the chat. I can let you get to that. But thank you so much for your talk. That was very interesting. It's nice how we kind of came full circle back to signals. Everybody's super excited about it. I can't wait until it's out of developer preview and we can use it in business apps and don't have to worry about anything changing. But definitely playing with it on side projects and here and there on examples. So yeah, thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks everyone. Thanks for your questions.
Yeah, and so this takes us to the end of our meetup. But before we go, I did want to introduce Joe. Joe Skeen, I believe you gave a talk, was it last month?
It was a couple months ago
Couple
on
months, okay.
falling in love with unit testing, if anyone remembers that.
That's right, yeah. We wanted to introduce you because you are our newest co-organizer here at the meetup. If you want to take a moment to just tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I'll keep this pretty brief, but I've been involved with Angular since about 2013, and I absolutely love interacting with the community. I've run a lot of the hackathons for ng-conf, and I'm just really excited for the opportunity to interact more with the community and hopefully be able to teach a little bit more about unit testing techniques in Angular.
Awesome. Well, we're happy to have you on board. All right, so that brings us to the end. Thank you all so much for putting, all the effort into giving these talks. I know it takes a lot of time to prepare these, so I really appreciate you guys doing that. If anybody wants to see the recording, these will be available on the ng-conf channel within 2 to 3 weeks usually. So it'll be available there. All right, well, thank you guys so much. Have a great rest of your evening. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
See
Bye-bye.
ya.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good night.